Josh. So Josh, that was Josh. That's hilarious. The people saw the live feed. They saw Josh for a second go, ugh, and then disappear. That's how the show will start on YouTube.
I hope his cold wasn't contagious via webcast.
Right. Yeah. Well, we already fought that through. How are you doing, Kevin? I haven't seen you forever. We are live, so we'll have to talk.
Yeah, no, I'm well, and I'm back, and I've put out my season preview magazine. I've taken care of all my family business, and
Nice.
The season is back upon us. So I'm raring to go.
I want to go through your season preview. I want to look for. We're going to go through that at some point.
Okay.
We will do that tomorrow. That would be good. I think because I would love to. I mean, I haven't even seen it yet. That's how crazy it's been. So I gotta. Where is it? Is it on USA Today directly? Or?
Well, with bits and pieces are starting to appear. It has to be on the newsstand for a while before we.
Okay, so it's officially on the newsstand. So I got to go get that.
Yeah. So, but it's funny. Like I don't read any other magazines preview, and I'm told that the Hockey News. I picked the Tampa Bay Lightning to come out of the East, and I thought, well, there can't be too many people that will do that, even though they're an improved team. And I found out since then the Hockey News did exactly the same thing.
Well, that's a good thing.
I'm not as unique as I thought I was. So.
Well, no, I mean it's hard not to. I mean, they really do have a lot of the right pieces in place. It's not.
Yeah, I mean they're a trendy pick, but I thought. It's just hard when you're a traditionalist to push that button on, the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Yeah.
Even though obviously they have a cup in their background, won by, Jay Feaster,
right.
manager. But it's still hard to do that, especially when there's Boston still sitting out there, and there's always a romance with the Penguins as well. Although I find my readers do not support my contention that the Penguins will be as good as they were last season.
See there, that. Yeah, I want to get into that. That's good. That's a really good one.
I mean, the news regarding Malkin or the uncertain status of Malkin might be the reason for that, that hesitancy on the part of some fans. Because I think it was Bob McKenzie reported this morning, or if it's not Bob McKenzie, then I can't remember exactly who it was, but said that Malkin hasn't even stepped on the ice yet.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, I mean, you would think that he would want to get into one or two exhibition games before the season starts. Not playing at all in the entire training camp, the entire preseason is a little scary.
Yeah, I mean, just the uncertainty of it. We just don't know. Although they've sort of indicated that it's not a long-term problem. But we've seen injuries that are billed as non-long-term. End up long term, day to day for 3 months, So
they're doing that right now. I mean, with Claude Giroux too, so it's the same kind of thing. This has been the HockeyBuzzCast. By the way, we want to just start the show. You guys have been watching, so we're gonna, since we started late today, we're just gonna say this is the HockeyBuzzCast on HockeyBuzz.com. I am Eklund, and this is Mike, and that's Kevin, and we are your hosts for today. Josh is not feeling well. I wouldn't say he's not well, but Josh is not feeling well.
He's under the weather. I mean, like way
under the weather. Like the weather's here.
Yeah.
Josh is like under the floor.
Yeah. He may be long term. He may not be day to day.
He tried to play. He tried to play injured.
He did.
He took the pregame. He took the pregame skate. He came out. He took a couple circles.
I want to say, this isn't the playoffs. You don't need to play hurt. It's the preseason. So
it was an upper body injury. Definitely wasn't
right. An upper body injury. Or Paul Holmgren says, an upper neck injury.
Yeah. But it was upper body, but it did cause him to bend over. So then it was below.
I think right now he's.
I hate when that happens.
Hitting the NyQuil hard. And is there anything better than a good solid cold and a big swig of NyQuil? I forget what comedian it was. Did a whole comedic thing about NyQuil and calling it the Big Q. That there's nothing better in my mind than
there actually is something better.
What is better?
Well, I'm old school, an old timer, and whiskey and honey. When I was a young man, my grandmother used to treat colds. Now I remember this when I was 4 and 5 years old, and I thought I've spoken on the medicinal value of whiskey and honey, and then it suddenly occurred to me one time that when you're 4 and 5 years old, a shot of whiskey with honey knocks you on your rear end and you sleep. So that was it just basically knocked you out, which was like the whole You know.
Here's a shot of Jack.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
So, but honestly, that's my beloved late grandmother used to treat my colds when I was 4 or 5 years old with whiskey and honey.
I love it. I love it. We just give the kids the Benadryl now. That puts them out pretty quick.
Yeah, Benadryl.
Just to correct my reporting, it was Damian Cox of Sportsnet, not Bob McKenzie, but still, if Malkin is out, he has not started skating yet. That is something that would give fans of the Penguins a bit of pause.
Yeah, although Malkin doesn't want to be in the preseason anyway, and he doesn't want to probably even be at training camp. So you wonder about sometimes of this stuff too. Like, I mean, an established player like that, training camp is not, if they're in shape, and I mean, a lot of players nowadays just are so obsessed. But I wanted to talk to you, Kevin, about this whole thing in all the injuries we've seen, and the theory behind that. Is there any theory that you have?
Well, no, but I mean, there's certainly been some discussion about that players need to start taking a little bit of time off in the summer. Everybody's in shape around the clock now, and I think most of us believe, and I think athletes do too, that you do need to rest. And if you're going to be in shape year-round, that means you're going to be working out more than they did, say, 25 years ago. And the more you work out, the more potential for injury. And it's just a fact of life. But I think it's a trade-off, because I think we used to get injuries from guys coming in and pushing too hard too quickly. But those tended to be short-term, where I think the injuries that we're now getting from guys, working out too hard, is, those can end up being long-term. But, I don't think it can be a bad thing if a guy is in shape all year round, because now they're coming to training camp, and all they're really trying to accomplish in training camp now is to get in game shape. And, I've always felt like training camp should be 10 days maximum, 9 or 10 days.
Right.
And,
so on that.
Yeah. I mean, I really don't even do preseason. I'm just, pretty much ready for it. Try to cover what's happening with the signings and so forth. But, 3 or 4 games to get the get in game shape and get your timing down. But, we don't need a lengthy preseason, that's for sure.
Well, the thing that's screwy is that you've had these weird, goofy injuries that have happened. I mean, Jordan Staal with a broken leg. I mean, it was a freak occurrence in Buffalo last week. And then on the weekend, you had the Leafs and the Sabres play 2 games back to back. Henrik Tolinder is probably done for his career after dislocating his shoulder. He was likely to make the Leafs as a depth defenseman. David Clarkson gets his orbital bone cracked by a Cody McCormick left hand. And now Cody Franzen, it's supposedly a bruised knee, but he trips on a rut. He's out for probably at least a couple weeks. And David Booth blocks a shot, and he's out for 4 weeks. So it's just like just weird, goofy injuries. I mean, I think that some NHL teams would probably be in favor of playing less preseason games. The Leafs are playing 8 this year. I think that's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's crazy, and it's obviously about money, right? So we know this. It's about money.
And then the other aspect here about this is, fans complain then when they don't see, top players in preseason games. Well, this is why. You don't want to put those guys in. You want to put in your guys that are going to be in the AHL, and you just don't want to risk this kind. And I just think we've got to cut down on training camp length and the number of exhibition games. 3 or 4 should be enough as far as I'm concerned. And if you did that, those games would probably be meaningful, because guys want to play a couple of games before the training game. So you pretty much will play your regular guys and get ready to go. And in the old days, you used to need training camp to figure out which rookies are going to make the team. None of that exists anymore. What guy catches people's attention at training camp? I mean, there's a few guys, but mostly, for the most part, you know the guys that you're going to give a chance to. And generally what ends up happening is they go down and they play well for 2 weeks, and then you bring them up from the
right.
8. So.
Yeah, and they would have caught your eye anyway, like even if you didn't have that long a break. I mean, if somebody like Michael Raffle last year was a good example for the Flyers, no one really expected him to come out. I mean, he was a signing and everything like that, but people were kind of slating him as probably a phantom or have you. And then he but he showed. But early, that was early. It was like a week, easily 1 week in. That we knew that Rafa was probably an NHL player who's going to be on the team. And at about the same point that suddenly Cleary didn't show up for in Philadelphia, which was a fun thing that was going on. I remember this time last year, Cleary had apparently come and was signing a tryout with the Flyers, and then he didn't show up that day. But yeah, I agree that I just want to see the NHL starting in the middle of September. I don't see any point in the season starting in October anymore. I mean, what is the point of that? I mean, what was the original thing? The original thinking was to keep it away from the NFL, right? But the NFL started earlier.
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, whether the season is located in the right spot. I mean, obviously the KHL starts earlier and ends earlier, and we do have a fair amount of complaining still about playing hockey in the middle of summer. Although, I think our fans have really started to come to expect that June is Stanley Cup time. So I don't know. I think you can. Survey fans until you're blue in the face, and sometimes you still don't come to the right answer. The best example of that is when, the reason they changed the schedule to, you remember when we didn't have people playing the other conferences, because when they surveyed fans loved divisional games, and they thought they were actually doing what fans wanted, and then the backlash was incredible.
Right, exactly.
Because they did that during the lockout. They surveyed fans and said, what would you rather do? But what fans say they like and what they do like, I think sometimes are two different things. So, it's complicated. If you moved it back, there'd probably be problems there as well, because there are a lot of teams that don't even, that there are some non-traditional markets that don't sell well in the first 2 months of the season. So if you move September, it could be even worse. Then you're going to have 3 months of that.
That's true, and I guess keeping as much of it away from the NFL season as possible. But I don't think the NFL really plays into the NHL at all, to be honest. And I don't think baseball plays into it either. I mean, we have baseball playoffs this week, so if you were starting this week, you would be going up against baseball playoffs. But the World Series ends up in October, late, so it doesn't really matter. But let's get into some news here. We have had some signings. And one of the big ones that this kind of took me by surprise a little bit with the number on this one. The Torrey Krug.
Yeah.
Torrey Krug. Corey.
Say that 3 times.
Corey Krug and Riley O'Ryan Smith. Both of them have signed deals, 1-year deals, $1.4 million apiece, right? 1-year deal, first of all, was surprising. And we know the Bruins were in a situation where they had to trade somebody, but do they get out of that now, Kevin? Do they not have to trade somebody?
I think this is Peter Chiarelli pulling a rabbit out of his hat here. I mean, this is really magic, and he just pulled off managerial home run here somehow. And this is interesting because clearly these two players are helping their team.
Right.
He now, when I looked at CapGeek.com today, and they were already, I think, $800,000 roughly over the cap, and now they've added 2.8 of cap hit, so that brings up to 3.6. And guess what? Mark Savar's long-term injury relief is going to be about $4 million, and we were all speculating they were going to have to move somebody. Everybody did, and even Chiarelli said that he might have to move a defenseman. Well, somehow, he's convinced his players, hey, give me some short-term help here, and I'm guessing, he has said to these players, look, you're part of our plan long-term, and you're going to get your just reward. But if you help us out now, we'll come back to you next year, and let's just say the cap's going to go up $5 million. If you believe that, he could say to them, that money will be yours, and probably it will. But, the number to me seemed low, and I think the term was interesting. And next year, he's already got $53 million committed for next year, but, he's got 3 defensemen coming off the books who are going to be restricted, McQuaid, Boychuk, and Barkowski. So then he'll make some decisions. And really, from both Krug's and the Bruins' perspective, waiting another year, I think, is helpful to determine his true value. In my mind, even though he's established himself as an intriguing offensive defenseman, you get 1 more year under him now. We're going to know a little bit more about him as a player. And, from his perspective, if he's even, if he's able to sustain this level, then, he's maybe deserving of a little more. And from the Bruins' perspective, if he doesn't, then, maybe he comes in at a long-term deal at less than he wanted this time around. So I think this is a instance where I think player and team work together for what's best interest of the team, probably with the long-term assurances that these guys. I don't think this situation works for everybody, but in this case, because of the Bruins are a very good team, and I think both of these players see themselves fitting in long-term, I think this was a win-win situation. I think if I'm an agent, I'm happy with this, or at least content with it. Maybe not happy, but content with it. And if I'm the team, I'm ecstatic over what I'm able to pull off.
They really are. And Mike, I want your opinion on this, but this is my last thought on this before I throw into you, Mike. This reminds me of like a Lou Lamoriello trick to a degree, where you would see like a player. He probably went to these guys and he said, "Listen, the way the CBA works is I can't jump you from 1.4 this year to $4 million next year to $5 million. There's that limit. You can only go a percentage each year, right?" So he's saying, but like Gregory Campbell, like you said, Daniel Paillet, Carl Sodenberg, these are all million-plus players who are coming off. Boychuk, McQuaid, Barkowski, they're all coming out. They're all UFAs next year. So he's probably looking and saying, listen, take this now, and then here's a little piece of paper, or just a handshake saying that next year we'll sign you for a 4-year, $16 million type contract. Or so that's what it feels like to me, Mike.
Yeah, and on top of all those players coming off the books, and on top of Mark Savard's money being put on long-term injury, at the end of this year, that bonus overage for Jerome McGinley, which is over $4 million, that comes off the books. So not even taking into consideration the cap situation, if it goes up, there's going to be more money there. And I'm sure that there was some sort of promissory agreement between Chiarelli and the agents for the respective players. You help me now, I'll help you later. And I think that, really good job by Chiarelli to be able to get that to happen, because I think that team, if they would have traded a McQuaid or traded a Boychuk, it would have been more weight on a guy like Chara, who's 38 years old, more weight on a guy like Seidenberg, who's coming off a long-term injury. They need that depth on defense to be a successful team, and Chiarelli got the job done with these two contracts.
It's a hell of a deal. I agree.
And what's interesting is that the logical guy to move that everybody was talking about was Boychuk, but I think he's very underrated. This is a guy that's got an exceptional shot. You don't hear much that about him. You don't hear people say that about him, but he does. And he's a good aggressive player, a good defender as well. And I think they need him. When you're that close to winning the Cup, I mean, they're certainly capable of making a march right to a Stanley Cup championship. You can't afford to give away like Boychuk. So I think this is a good move, and this allows it gives Chiarelli time to sort out what he really wants to do. Maybe Boychuk is also in their long-term plans as well. He should be. He's a very competent defenseman.
Yeah, no, he definitely should be, Mike.
For the right price point, I think he's 30 years old. He's a UFA at the end of this year. Who knows what the market? I mean, I can look up and see what defensemen are out there as free agents. We know that Brooks Orpik got over $5 million, and there's sort of similar type defensemen, although Boychuk's 4 years younger, and I think a better player. But if the Bruins step up and give him a reasonable contract, he fits into their mold. He is a Boston Bruins type defenseman, so it would make sense to keep him.
Yeah, I agree with that, and also I think, to me, I'd want to keep him even more than McQuaid, who I also think's a real serviceable defenseman as well. So yeah, no, I like that. I mean, I think that's true of just about every player. When we speak about them, being a good fit, it's all dependent, obviously, on what they want and their demands are as well. I mean, Boychuk is not a good fit at $5.5 million or something like that. So
I mean, this is a team that's going to be scratching every night a defenseman that makes over $1 million, depending on how they slice it. They're going to have, on a regular basis, they're going to be doing that because Dougie Hamilton makes under $1 million, and he's going to be playing every night for him.
Yeah.
They have 6 million who have, and they have six guys who are over $1 million right now. And also, Joe Morrow is turning a lot of heads too as a really good young defenseman. This team is crazy deep, and they are set up to make a trade at some point.
Yeah, I mean, and they will. They're going to have traded defensemen at some point. I think they'll do that. But sometimes you think you're going to do that, and then you get 2 injuries, and
right.
Then you're thankful you've got 8 or 9 defensemen.
of course, the gamble that they have, which every team has some, little Achilles heel, and I think it's if Tuukka Rask goes down, it's still they still don't have. I mean, Svedberg is what Svedberg is, right? But they're still banking heavy on. They've got a $600,000 backup there, with a hell of a lot of. I mean, this is a team that maybe doesn't need a superstar goalie, but this is another situation where say Rask. I'd put Boston in there with other teams that if Rask were to go down, this is a good spot for Marty Brodeur. To come in, you get a guy who's if Rask was going long-term injury reserve, or Lundqvist or Mason, one of these teams that really depends heavily on one goalie.
Well, yeah, I mean, but the thing is, you can say that for a lot of teams. I mean, if Lundqvist goes down with the Rangers, the Rangers are done. I mean, Cam Talbot is good as a guy who can play the second back-to-back games and maybe play 20 to 25 games in the NHL. But if you need him to play 60, I think the Rangers are in trouble. The same thing with Svedberg. Svedberg is not proven right now. Rask is going to play probably 65, maybe close to 70 games. He's young. He can fill the bill. But if he goes down, the Bruins are in trouble.
I mean, that's essentially true about every team in the league, except for the teams that don't have a star goalie.
Right. That's true.
And they're at a disadvantage to begin with.
Right. That's precisely it. That's it's some people. Who was it that said this is one of your lines? I thought, Kevin, that it's not called hockey, it's called goalie.
Yeah, exactly. So
I mean, that's so Brad Stewart also signed a 2-year extension with the Colorado Avalanche for considerably more money, $3.6 per year, and the Avalanche have been. There's been a lot of talk a little bit. I mean, there's a team that's struggling in the preseason. They haven't won a game yet in the preseason, but I'm not really that concerned with them. I think that they really have gotten. It seems to me like, Kevin, that they have that Patrick Waugh has this team, and in general the whole finances of that team. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot of drama going on in Colorado.
Well, it's interesting. I wouldn't be concerned either, except for the fact that Patrick Waugh is concerned. And if Patrick Waugh is concerned, then I if I'm a fan,
right.
Because this guy is. I'm kind of president of the Waugh fan club. I thought he was an unbelievably competitive player. I loved talking to him when he played, and now as a coach, I think he still has that fire and passion. And when he said he didn't like how the team was playing, I think he has a great sense. He has his fingers on the pulse. He kind of knows. So I think there is probably something that they're not at the same level that they were at last season, or Patrick wouldn't have said that. I think that was a message to his team. But the Stewart signing I like a lot. I mean, there's been a lot of talk in the last month about maybe our salary structure in the NHL is just slightly out of whack. We're not giving our stars enough money, and maybe giving too much money to the role players, or the 3, 4, 5, 6 defensemen, that sort of thing. And I as a guy who grew up in a union house in a union state, I mean, I get that. I mean, you want to spread the money down for the guys who have been toiling and being in the trenches. And Brad Stewart's one of those guys. And I think this was a good move by the Colorado Avalanche. He's a very popular player in the room. Doesn't say a lot, but what he does say, people find intriguing and right on the money. I think he's just physical enough. I wouldn't call him a fighter, but he's tough enough to handle himself. He'll stand up for his teammates. And for a team that's believes it's on the verge of joining the major contenders, I think this was a good acquisition. And getting him tied up, I think, the guys that play like Stewart can play a long time without having a decline in their abilities. So I like this extension for him. A little bit more maybe than you want to pay, but sometimes you got to do that.
They're in a good spot with all the guys that they have on early level contracts right now. So 2 years still puts them in. Any longer than 2 years, now you're starting to get to the point. They are at some point going to have issues in Colorado. They're going to have McKinnon getting $8, $9, $10 million a year. There's going to be things are going to change there.
Yeah.
Which again feeds into my theory that Ryan O'Reilly within 2 years will not be on the Avalanche, because he's going to expect a big payday, and I think you're going to have to pay McKinnon. But to the point of Stewart, I mean, I like the Avalanche. I love their forwards. I like the additions they made with Briere and Iginla up front. They added experience to a young core of Duchesne and O'Reilly and McKinnon. So I think up front they're really good. Varlamov is one of the better goaltenders in the league. I just don't think that Joe Sakic and Patrick Waugh addressed the defense enough. Stewart is one of the few acquisitions that they did make on the blue line. He's a veteran guy. He's dependable. But really, they've got Eric Johnson, they've got Jan Hayda, they've got Tyson Berry, and they have Brad Stewart. The rest of the defense, I don't even consider 5 or 6 quality in the NHL. And I think they needed to add one or two more bodies. Maybe they can do that by the trade deadline, but I don't think they're serious contenders in the West because of the lack of defensive depth.
I wouldn't argue that point, but because I think that defense needs upgrading. But I just don't think this summer's marketplace those guys were available. I think that was part of the issue. And Eric Johnson had a very good season last year, and he was a little bit overlooked. I know when I was embedded with the U.S. Olympic Selection Committee, there was a lot of discussion about him because he was playing so well. And like he suffers a little bit from the early expectations of being the #1 pick, and he really didn't live up to them early on. He had obviously had some injury issues as well, but I think now he's become a real serviceable player. And Barry, we know what his value is. I think it was really evident after they lost him how important he was to that team. And so I agree with you. I think they need some upgrading. But I felt that Sakic and Waugh did not make moves because there just wasn't anyone available. Like there were some guys available with trade, but none of them were guys that I was overly excited about. I think they, in some cases, they could cause even greater issues than the problems they were able to solve.
And what I think is smart about the way they've handled this too is they're not at the point where they would go get like a Dion Phaneuf. They're not like a team that's on one player away from winning. And even though they had such a great year, I think it's nice to see a team not suddenly think that that's absolutely going to happen again automatically, and that they're going to be improved by 10 more points, and that they're there. I think that there's a little bit of a realistic expectation going on for people I've talked to in Colorado who say, yeah, last year was a great year. We'd love to be able to have that kind of year again and be back there. But, no one expected them to win the division, least of all themselves, and the way they won the division was pretty crazy in and of itself. So yeah, I think there's,
That makes a lot of sense, what you're saying. It's just like Dion Phaneuf would be a great example. Like, there's certain teams where I think he would fit nicely into. Like, he would be a good Red Wing. I think he'd be a good Flyer.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure the Colorado Avalanche, with the team they have there, with a young team. I mean, do you want a guy who is a very talented hockey player with a big shot and everything, but he can fly off the handle a little bit. And I don't think he's a good fit there for Colorado. That's not the type of guy that I'd want there. I'd rather actually have Eric Johnson leading my defense if I'm in Colorado than Dion Phaneuf. But if I'm in a different team, I'd love to have Dion Phaneuf. I just think sometimes just the character of the team and what you need and what you're trying to accomplish, and the young guys they have there as well. I'm not sure Phaneuf would have been a good fit there.
Talking to Danny Briere, go ahead, Mike.
No, I was just going to say that if you differentiate between the top contenders in the West, the Kings, the Hawks, the Blues, they're all 5-6 deep in real quality defensemen. I mean, especially with the Hawks, you got Keith, you got Seabrook, you got Leddy, you've got Roosevelt, Yarmulson. I mean, Yarmulson is said to be if he wasn't on the Hawks as a number 3 defenseman, he'd probably be a top pairing defenseman on other NHL clubs. And you can say the same thing for the Kings, whereas the Avalanche, I think they have a top 4 that is decent, but not anywhere close to what the Blues, the Hawks, or the Kings have. And I'm even eliminating the Sharks, who, I think with the loss of, they traded Stewart, and with the loss of Boyle, they're not as good as they were last year. But I think they're still above Colorado as well.
Yeah, I think so too. And I mean, talking to Dan, I had a little discussion with Danny Briere to see how he was liking things out there, and he said he loves the atmosphere. He says, and again, like a guy like Dion Phaneuf, like you're saying, Kevin, the atmosphere right now is really nice. He said that there's a real positive energy. The players are all very respectful of each other. There's an intensity that's going on, and they know they've got something great, and they know that that they're overachieving right now, and that's exciting. So there's a lot of cool stuff going on there, and I think you're right. I think it's gonna take some time to have that all settle in. And if the Avalanche are a team that they might not make the playoffs this year, and I've said this before, and they still might be better than they were last year. It's possible in the Western Conference that could be the case. So It's such a strange conference that way, and they have to keep developing. I wanted to get your opinion, Kevin, because we haven't talked to you since the whole Ryan Johansson saga has been going on. What's your general thoughts on this whole drama passion play we got?
I just think the situation is contrary to the way we do business in the NHL since the salary cap. I mean, when the first salary cap was introduced, GMs were predicting that players would be moved off the roster, and the GMs would make cold, hard decisions, and veterans would move out. There'd be a large pool of players every summer, and then you'd get new players and move them in. It'd almost sort of be NFL-like. Right. Some respects, but that hasn't happened. What's happened is all teams have identified their core players, particularly their young talent. They've signed them to long-term deals. They're married to these guys. Everybody's wearing rings, and it's a wonderful deal. Yeah. But so now what we have the Columbus Blue Jackets, who have identified their best offensive player, and they're not playing nice. Neither side is, and I think it's worrisome if you're fans. I mean, we don't normally see this with our NHL teams and their star players. So, and you talk to GMs, and it's easy for them to see where the compromise is. They believe it's in a short-term bridge deal, and somewhere between 4-7 and 3,
right.
and get it done. I mean, but you know what? It's easy for us to do that, but just to say, but. If a team thinks that $3 million is really the right for their budget, and if he really believes that 4.7 is what he's really worth, sometimes getting to that middle is not as easy as we would like it. But I think if you're in a boardroom with the Columbus Blue Jackets, you do have to pay homage to the fact that, what I say if I'm John Davidson is, hey, we expect this guy to be with us for 10 years. Do we really want him to come back angry over what's transpired? I think there's got to be remove the animosity from this if there is such. Now, I mean, they're going to say there's not, but it sure feels like there is.
Oh yeah, I think there's definitely animosity. I mean, it really feels like there is. It's people I've talked to. It does seem that the 4.7 deal. The problem was the second year being so high, and that second year becoming the third year and the fourth year because of how you have to qualify guys.
Right.
So. I think if they got to I really do believe the compromise is there too, but I think it has to be in somewhere in 2 years at $4 million apiece, somewhere in there, and then you're in a different ballpark. But if that second year is $6 million, that's where I think this thing's falling apart, because that's where the Blue Jackets are, and I think the way that Columbus came at this in the beginning, or the way that Johansson's group came at the beginning, the first deal was 4 years, $30 million. So they were looking at 7.5 a year for 4 years, taking right up to free agency. That just felt like to the Blue Jackets. I think that just really cut them to the core, and perhaps they overreacted in this situation. But it did cut them.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting. The smaller markets, they tend to want to pay less, but it almost feels like they got to pay more. To keep the guys happy. And I remember when Eric Stahl got his contract in Carolina. I don't have that in front of me. Maybe Michael, you could look it up. But it seemed to me it was like $85 million a year.
A quarter. Yeah.
And I think Johansson. It almost feels like he's thinking he needs a premium too to play in Columbus, where his opportunities, at least in terms of having a big stage, are more limited than someone who's playing in a major market. Now maybe he's not even considering that, but I'm just saying from the outside looking in, that's what
it feels like. I do agree with you on that one. It doesn't sound like it's getting done, Mike.
I think circumstances have conspired against both Johansson and the Jackets in this respect. I mean, look at the situation we just talked about with the Bruins. They didn't have hardly any cap room, and they fit these two guys under their number. A couple years ago, the Leafs had Nazem Kadri and Cody Franzen had about $2.5–3 million under the cap. They squeezed them both in. In this instance, you look at Cap Geek and you see that Columbus is $14 million under the cap. Johansson led their team with over 30 goals, led their team in points, was a top 5 pick, finally starting to come around, and he's saying through his agent, give me a piece of the pie, and they don't want to give him the piece of the pie. So I think that's the problem. If they were up against the cap and they only had $2 million, I think it would be much easier for Johansson to accept that's all he can get. But with all that money available under the cap, he wants his piece of the pie.
Well, but that brings up a real interesting question, and I think it's the psychology of the salary cap for the fan is that everybody's got to go to the ceiling. But there are still teams in this league where it does not make economic sense for them to do that, and that's the struggle. And also I find it interesting too that the difference between NFL fans and NHL fans and the way they view the cap. Like in the NFL, they've got all their fans trained now, where if in the summer, if they've got to lose a top star, the fans will say, well, what are they going to do? They got cap problems. Right. Now, if that happens in the NHL, they all blame the GM. Like, he's not managing effectively. But in the NFL, I just find it amazing. Like there's no uproar when you got a top player and he's got to leave. Because the guy says, well, they were squeezed by the cap.
It's not in Philadelphia with the receiver here, that goes to the Capitol, that goes to the Redskins.
Yeah,
the top receiver, and everyone was like, well, yeah, it's probably for the best. His money was too much.
Yeah, no, that's right. The psychology of the cap is certainly playing, and I agree with Mike on this, that is playing a role in the way the fans perceive that because they're so far away from the ceiling. Everybody's just saying, well, but yeah, you can boil it down like this, and I've had a disagreement with an NHL executive about this who say that I'm not paying enough homage to the fiscal responsibility of a team. But to me, if I'm in that boardroom, I say, look, we're just talking about a 2-year deal at $4 million, if that's the way to go. And again, I agree how that second year plays out is a big part of it. But at some point, you have to say to yourself, if we're $1 million apart, in the grand scheme of everything, is that $1 million worth ticking off, our best offensive player at this point in time?
And with the uncertain status right now of Nathan Horton, I mean, they don't know when he's going to play. That puts even more pressure on the Jackets because if they get off to a bad start, and you relied on a Toronto team collapsing in the last 20 games to get into the playoffs. If Jonathan Bernier doesn't go down, probably Columbus doesn't make the playoffs last year. That was a 1 in 100 shot. There's no guarantee if you get off to the bad start that they got off to last year, if they do that this year, that they'll make the playoffs. So they need to get Johansson, who was their leading scorer, in. It's just a question of how much they're willing to pay.
I'm going to play this weird angle on this, okay? Check this out. And this just sort of came to me. We have never talked about the Columbus Blue Jackets this much, ever. For what it's worth.
Yeah.
This is by far the most I have written about, talked about, discussed about their entire situation. The most I've looked at their cap structure, the most I've looked at their lineup, the most I've looked at the whole thing. And I've long had a theory that the Minnesota Wild are really upset because they're considered the least popular team outside their market of any team in the NHL whenever they do these surveys. No one follows the Wild. They don't have any fans anywhere else. I mean, the Panthers have more fans in other cities than the Minnesota Wild have, which is crazy. You would think. But one of the reasons I always thought was because the Minnesota Wild never had anything like this. They never had any controversy, no one thinking about them, no one talking about them, nothing at all. The Blue Jackets came off a year last year where they were really there was a lot of excitement about them. And for the first time, there was actually, we watched the Blue Jackets and we rooted for the Blue Jackets. A lot of people did, just because they were playing the Mighty Penguins or what have you, and they almost pulled it off, and it was an incredible series. And now suddenly, now that this has continued on, we're talking about the Blue Jackets. And JD, who is an amazing public relations guy, is out there pushing again, and he's keeping the Blue Jackets in the news. The Blue Jackets are continually, and this will probably get done at some kind of compromise, but is there a benefit to this whole situation for the Blue Jackets? I mean, long term, Kevin, you talk about, they don't want to take off the player, and I get that, but actually as an organization, Kevin, is it possible this is a beneficial thing?
Well, I mean, that's a fascinating theory, and it really fits into the old, PR idea that all news, good or bad, is good news for the franchise. Because
right.
And I mean, there's something. I know what you're saying, and I can at least buy into that. I don't think that's their intent here, but I mean, it makes some sense. They had such good karma, like they were the better team in that series against last year.
Yeah, they were.
It was just, they were fun to watch, and I think in the city they have regained the goodwill that they had when they first moved in and they were selling tickets, because there had been a real slide on that. So they're in the news now, and there was a lot of people who really didn't know anything about Johansson before all this happened.
Right. And I bet you they're taking some headlines away from the Ohio State Buckeyes this time of year, which is probably really hard to do in general. That football team there is so
I don't think they're taking any headlines away from
okay, maybe not.
Buckeyes, but the I guess you could certainly make a case that it makes them more of a national team because they have a controversy. But
Yeah.
I do think over the long run it's helping Johansson, because I think people didn't even know who he was.
Right.
Now everybody thinks, wow, he's got 30-some goals. He's a really good player. But they'll get this settled, and they'll have to kind of move on with it. But it's certainly been an interesting story.
Kevin, I think he attended an Oliver Stone Film Festival this weekend with the.
No, I'm telling you. I mean, was there a more nondescript team 3 years ago than the Columbus Blue Jackets? I mean, in the NHL that you couldn't put a personality with, or probably most people in the NHL even name 5 players on. Most fans. I mean, it was a team that just they were absolutely.
They were the Eastern Conference version of the Minnesota Wild.
They were.
Nobody knows anything about them. I mean,
right.
That's for sure.
Yeah, and they made the playoffs once, and they got eliminated in 4 games, right? We'd never seen anything. Rick Nash was there, and maybe the other time people talked about them was during that controversy when they were trying to trade Rick Nash. Right. I mean, but besides that, we never talked about them. I mean, they weren't going to make the playoffs when they were in the Western Conference. It wasn't even a possibility. So it was completely the whole thing was absurd. And yeah, I just wonder. And the agent too. I heard people yesterday saying, I talked to an agent who said that agent's never going to get any more clients because of the way he's handling this. And I said, I think that's absolutely ridiculous. I think that this agent is getting this is with agents. I do think all publicity is good publicity, for sure. And this.
Oberhart was a guy that a lot of people mentioned as he would have been a good director. Like when they were looking for a new head of the NHL Players Association, I heard many players said to me they thought Kurt Oberhart would have been a good choice. He's a very bright guy, and he works hard for his clients. And the one thing about this, and fans can't do this, but as a journalist we ought to be able to do it, to separate ourselves. I mean, this is no different than a lawyer, and he is a lawyer, represent his client in court of law. You do whatever you can to support them. He's just battling away. This isn't nothing to do. It's not Kurt Oberhart's fault. That's just the strategy they've laid out. And if he worked for, the best example is Bill Zito, who was an agent and now he's working for a team. And I've often said this, much to the chagrin of both Donald Fair and Bill Daly. If you had reversed them in the last lockout, we'd probably have the same result. I mean, you're 2 guys battling for your group. You just represent the cause. So.
Absolutely, and the crazy thing about that, Kevin, is I don't know if you had this discussion, but I had this discussion with a couple owners after the lockout. The amount of respect that the owners had for Donald Fair after that lockout was done was intense. They really thought he did a great job. They hated him. They talked him down. I mean, I talked to 2 owners who said, yeah, man, he got us to give way more than we thought we'd ever, and this is off the record, way more than we thought we'd ever give. And, here we are. And I think, the owners who also are, guys who are used to dealing with lawyers and aren't this kind of stuff doesn't throw them as much as it throws fans, and even general managers who are maybe more still separated a little bit further. They just look at this guy like, wow, and maybe he is setting himself up to be Donald Fair's replacement 10 years from now or 9 years from now or whenever it's going to be, because this would definitely scare the owners. I mean, if you think about it right now, I mean, they're going to remember Oberhart, he was the Ryan Johansson. Oh man, oh geez, that's not going to be good.
Yeah, and he was Kyle Turris's agent as well. And
Turris too, yeah. And then there have been guys he was Dubinsky's agent, and that went perfectly fine. So I guess everything's different. You have anything else, Mike?
Oh, no, I don't actually. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I didn't mean to throw you for a loop there. We're up against 2 o'clock, and I wanted to. There we go. But no, it's great having you back, Kev. It's good seeing you again.
Well, I'm back now. We're ready to go, so I should be here all week, as they say.
Fantastic, and I'm going to have at some point this week we're going to have Eric Duhashik on, because Kevin and I and Eric are working on something. It'll be kind of fun to talk about in the future. But I talked to Eric last weekend and the weekend before, and we're it's going to be kind of fun. So we'll talk about that too. So enjoy the games tonight if you're going, and if you're playing, I guess we're done split squad games, thank God. So yeah, I think we just have regular games left now. So we'll see. But,
regular season's just around the corner. Thank God is right.
I know this week feels like it should be starting. It feels like it should be this Wednesday. This is when it just. I think that how much camp we've had until now feels right to me. That feels like the right amount of time. These guys getting signed feels like it would get signed the Monday before the season starts. It just feels all. I don't know.
Well, I'm very proud that I have not watched a single minute of preseason hockey. Although I do watch the highlights. I'll have to confess.
What does it say for me that I watched both split squad games between Toronto and Ottawa on 2 separate monitors?
A sick man, just a sick man. But sicker than Josh Remmer. That's all sick.
Yeah,
well, I'm sick in the head, not in the throat.
Don't go crazy, but yeah, that's not a good thing. Not going to go to Josh Rimmer level yet. But anyway, remember, guys, without the buzz, it is just hockey. Talk to you soon.